Watermelon T-shirt, Larsen C. I'm going to talk about the definitions of Chinese Filipino literature.
早上好，我的题是 Calvin Tiffany. I'm going to talk about the generation of Chinese writers.
早上好，我是名 teacher Park Young-soo. I'm going to talk about a brief history of the Chinese in the Philippines.
早上好，我是名 teacher cammi, and I'm going to talk about the history of Chinese Filipino writing. 早上好，我是名 teacher Catherine Phao. I'm going to talk about the true story of Battle by Caroline Howe. Oh, ba't parang malungkot ka?
Wala.
Talaga? Bakit? Ano bang problema mo?
Wala sabi.
Meron nga eh. Nakikita nga sa mukha mo may problema ka. Sabihin mo na sa akin.
Naramdaman mo na ba yun? Yung parang ibang turing ng mga kaibigan mo sa'yo? Kung bali sa Ingles, parang alienated.
Bakit? Ano bang turing ng mga kaibigan mo sa'yo?
Iba. Porket in-check ako, iba ng turing nila sa akin.
Alam mo, Kitty, porket in-check tayo, hindi pa rin tayo naiiba sa kanila. Pinanganak na tayo dito sa Pilipinas, pero pusong Pinoy pa rin tayo. Alam mo, may ikukwento ako sa'yo. Sa kwentong ito, maiintindihan mo kung bakit naiiba tayo sa kanila.
Talaga?
What is Chinese Filipino literature? Firstly, Chinese Filipino literature is literature written by Filipinos, primarily for Filipinos. Its practitioners are Filipinos of Chinese descent, usually natural-born citizens, whose first language is often Filipino or Amoy or both. If linguistically possible, fact is they grew up in a hodgepodge of Amoy Filipino English, which is often the true language of their dreams and thus of their poetry. They are most likely third-generation descendants of Chinese immigrants and write mainly in English and or Filipino. Based from our research, Chinese Filipino literature is a new literature, a very young literature, most of which is only being written at the moment. It has not yet no major works to boast of, no epics or canons, masters or messiah. Our memories are not of China but of Chinatown. We do not have conquering heroes or legendary warriors to celebrate, only merchants, artisans, entrepreneurs. Ours is not a history of conquest or even of mysticized barter out of occasional persecution and continual accumulation. The Chinese has always been the invisible person in Philippine society, yet not seem inscrutable or unknown.
Chinese writers are categorized into three generations. First generation of immigrants who came in the 30s and who were educated in China and influenced by the May 4, 1919 new literature movement in China. The second generation are Philippine-born Chinese who received bilingual education and who started writing in the 60s. And the present generation of writers consisting mostly of new immigrants from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, who came during the 70s and the 80s. It is significant to say that Chinese language literature in the Philippines since the 70s is being written by new immigrants from East Asia rather than by local-born. This demonstrates the continuance of Chinese language literature as an immigrant literature in the country. The third generation writers write mostly in English and or Filipino because these are the languages that are better equipped in. A majority choose English over Filipino since they are mostly educated in Catholic and Protestant schools, which traditionally stress the use of English. Facility in using the Chinese language has admittedly deteriorated over the past 20 years, and although many Chinese Filipino born after 60s still communicate in Amoy, they hardly read, much less write, in the Chinese language. As a written language, Chinese is accessible only to around 2% of the population, so that anyone aspiring to national significance in literature will likely not consider it as his or her medium.
Presence of people from the Chinese mainland in the Philippines has been evident since during the Ice Age, when a land bridge enabled many people from the southern China to settle in the Philippines. Ethnic Chinese sailed down and frequently interacted with the indigenous travelers, evidenced by a collection of priceless Chinese artifacts found in the Philippines dating back right up to the 10th century. Prehistory evidence attests to the fact that many Datus and Lahis in the Philippines were of mixed Filipino and Chinese ancestry. The arrival of the Spaniards to the Philippines attracted many Chinese male immigrants from China and maritime trade flourished during the Spanish occupation. The Spanish authorities restricted the activity of the Chinese immigrants and confined them to the Perian near Intramuros, with low chances of employment and prohibited from owning land. Most of them engaged in retail trade or acted as skilled artisans to the Spanish colonial authorities. The Chinese revolted 14 times against the Spanish abuses, but their revolts were quickly put down by joint forces of the indigenous Filipino, Mexican, and the Spaniards. Deeply distrustful of the Chinese immigrants, the Spaniards conducted a total of 6 massacres against them. Most Chinese male immigrants converted to Catholicism, intermarried with indigenous women, and adopted Hispanic name and costumes. The Chinese mestizo, a mixture of Filipino Chinese or Spanish Chinese, were largely confined to the Binondo area. However, they eventually spread all over this island and became traders, moneylenders, and landowners. During the American colonial period, the Chinese Exclusion Act in the United States was also put into effect in the Philippines. However, the Chinese was able to settle in the Philippines despite strict American law enforcement. During the World War II, the Japanese massacred many unmixed Chinese. Chinese Filipino soldiers and guerrillas joined in the fight against the Japanese imperial force during the Japanese occupation in the Philippines. After independence, successive Philippine presidents have had ambivalent attitude about the Chinese Filipinos. President Ramon Magsaysay and Carlos P. Garcia promoted the Filipino-first policies and put in force government directives to hinder the ownership of businesses by the Chinese Filipino who were still citizens of the Republic of China. During the martial law period, Chinese language schools were ordered closed. Following People's Power Revolution as the one, the Chinese Filipino quickly gained national spotlight as Connie Aquino, a Chinese mestiza, eventually became president. She encouraged a free press and cultural harmony, a process which led to burgeoning of the Chinese language media.
The contact between Chinese and Filipinos, however, was not limited to commerce. Along with the exchange of goods, the exchange of cultures. Many Filipino and Chinese folktales, for instance, parallel to one. From 1889 to 1919, three other newspapers appeared. All of them dealt with the Chinese political affairs. Although they were all short-lived, they encouraged many Chinese to contribute political writings. The 1930s were especially fruitful years for the Chinese writers in the Philippines. Literary magazines like Way I Only Love, 1933, Students' Literary Front, 1933, and Tenma Pegasus in 1944, and many newspapers included literary sections. These literary magazines, however, were short-lived and never reaching the 1940s. The growth of Chinese literature in the Philippines was halted by the invasion of the Japanese. The only Chinese newspapers allowed to circulate was the Japanese-controlled Manila News, which did not contain a literary section. After World War II, literature in Chinese was revived. In addition to the establishment of more Chinese schools, the underground tabloids then became dailies. Some books were also published at this time. Literary